Hi, Al.
Hi, everybody.
Morning, everyone.
Good. Let me bring my slides up, okay?
So Nicole, you'll have to make him a host, co-host.
Morning now. Hi, everyone.
Good morning, John.
We don't have anybody externally for today's meeting, so I wasn't going to go through your big introduction today, if that's okay, just because
No problem.
everyone knows you, but and so I don't have my introduction to all the or the welcoming of everyone today too, but we will for the next session.
Okay, not a problem. Are we ready to get started? Do we want to wait a minute or two to see if anybody else is? It's just at 10 o'clock
Maybe,
now.
yeah, maybe a couple minutes just to get everyone going. It's bright and sunny day, but it's also quite cold out.
Yeah, we got a beautiful blue day here, but also cold. It's 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's a cool one.
Yes, it's been freezing here.
Yeah, but you are hardy people. You're.
I don't know about that.
Oh, it was a mistake. It was a mistake call.
You're probably missing Florida, eh, Al?
Boy, we were on the phone this morning with our daughter, and it's beautiful down there. They have a nice. They're going to have 70 degrees today, so I don't know why I stay here. All my social capital is here, so I guess maybe that's why.
Yes. Or 6 months in Florida and 6 months in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Well, this past year we've been down there now for a month and a half, so each year we're extending that. It hopefully pretty soon will be the whole winter.
Well, we've been in extreme cold warnings, all kinds of things. Like it's minus 24 today, so it's balmy compared to what it's been.
Oh God. I'm doing some work with some people from Australia, and so we're on calls regularly with them, and they have they're in their summer now, so this is the warmest time of the year for them. So every time we have a meeting, they're all sort of in their t-shirts and tank tops, and I've got like a sweatshirt on. It's crazy.
So maybe
We need to be unmuted. You're on mute.
sorry, so I'm going to get us started. Just like everyone else, we have Goma Nog de Windeman. So welcome to the staff from Nog. We have Al Condosi here with us today to do some more work, and he's going to talk to us about bringing back our passion post-pandemic. And we've done several series over the past year. So I don't know if I just got unmuted or what happened. The joys from working from home. So anyways, welcome. And Al is doing some work with us for the next year. So those sessions have been sent out. So today I would like to welcome Al to talk about bringing back our passion post-pandemic.
Great, thanks, Tanya, and great to be back with our colleagues this morning. Over the last couple meetings that we've had, management team meetings, we've really been looking at and thinking about hope and joy and, bringing back our passion and really navigating, if we can, through the final parts of this pandemic. And hopefully that's the situation we find ourselves in. We know around North America, certainly in the United States, the Omicron variant infection rate is dropping. There is not another variant on the horizon, at least that we know about, and so our hope is that the 2 long years that we've been really in the throes of a pandemic, which has really slowed everything down for us, will be receding, and that we're going to find ourselves hopefully back in the process of getting people involved in our community. So what we wanted to do today was explore this a little bit. We wanted to talk a little bit about what a pandemic can do or has done to our energy level and to the kinds of things that we were working towards, and then really shift into some ideas and strategies around getting us back into our groove. I call it getting our mojo back, if you will. And so I wanted to, we're going to kind of do this in, I think, 4 parts, right? First is going to be where we were prior to the pandemic, how we were proceeding. Then we're going to really, look at the pandemic slowing us down and really beginning to in many cases, stop the forward progress that we were making, and also sapping some of our energy and some of our hope and joy. We're then going to explore some ideas and strategies. We're going to do that through the chat room. We're going to use the chat room today to really, share some ideas and constructs. And then the last formal session will be some, ideas to get us rolling, and then we open it up to questions. We have about 40 of us on the call today. And so when we get to the Q&A, we'll use the chat room for the Q&A, but I think we can also, if folks want to raise questions or bring up issues, and they want to do that actually or verbally on the Zoom call, I think we'll be able to do that. Sometimes when we have a large group, these sessions have attracted upwards to 100 people, and sometimes that gets difficult to manage, individual input. But today, because we only have 36, 40 of us on the call, we may be able to do those actually. So let's get started with this idea of bringing back, our passion, and really beginning to think about, what community living Algoma is about, what we have been, passionately trying to achieve in the time that community living Algoma was founded, right? Because as an organization, Community Living Algoma was really founded by families who wanted their children to be included, to be involved, to be active, to have friends, to participate, to do all the things that typical families do, right? And because of disability realities and history, kids with disabilities were really not afforded those kinds of opportunities. Consequently, a group like Community Living Algoma emerges to really begin to change things up. And the purpose of, just everyday life for their sons and daughters was really the passion that actually started Community Living Algoma and many, many, many other organizations around the country. I know in my own experience in the United States, I worked for an organization called CLASS, that stood for Community Living and Support Services. And I was in that, I worked there for close to 50 years. Our organization was founded similar to Community Living Algoma by families who wanted their children, didn't want their children in institutions, didn't want their children to be in special or separate places. They just wanted their kids to be involved in everyday life, right? And that's the purpose that we rally around, right? That's how we got our start. And I think for many of us that have been attracted to this field, who have come aboard, have come for that very same reason, or for those very same reasons, right? And if you stop and you think what really got us here, what was your story in terms of getting involved in this field, doing this purpose, right? Which is helping people live everyday lives. What was it that got you here? And for many of us, it's been experiences in our family. For many of us, it's been very personal. I know for me, many of you know my story growing up with my cousin who had Down syndrome, and really just witnessing, how she was treated was the motivating factor for me. But each of us have a story. And if you could track back to that experience, or to that which launched you, right? It might have been something in school. It might have been, something, a neighbor that you knew, or somebody in your family experienced a disability, and you really saw the negative ripples that unfolded with that. And for others of us, it's not just the disability agenda. It could just be, being of service, making your life count, doing something that matters, and you think about all the employment options that you might have had as you came through school, that you could have been involved in computers or retailing or service industry, but most of us have chosen to kind of do something that really matters, something that we can look back on and say, I'm proud that I did this, that my efforts, as small as they might have been, or as focused as they might have been, have helped other people, right? For many of us, I know that the notion of unfairness, injustice, is a very motivating factor. I know for me, when Carrie and I would go, out into the community, and I would see how people would treat Carrie. Sometimes they would be mean to her, make fun of her, mock how she talked. Other times they just, people just disregarded her, or just didn't even look at her, just looked around her, not thinking that she really mattered, or that she could have anything to offer. And I know for me, that unfairness was really a catalyst. It just didn't seem right that Carrie couldn't go to school. Back at the time we were growing up, Carrie couldn't go to school. Schools didn't accept kids with disabilities. That Carrie couldn't do the things that we routinely did was patently unfair to me, and consequently really was the catalyst for me. The purpose was equality, right? And fairness, right? So we've all had these experiences. We've all, have been through this agenda, and we signed on with an organization like Community Living Algoma to try to do whatever we could to make our energies matter in the lives of other people, or in service to our greater community, right? So those notions of fairness, and those notions of service, and those notions of trying to make something better than you found it, those kinds of things really fuel purpose. And it's the stuff that got us started. And as we kind of got involved, I know for me, as I got involved in a formal way in disability advocacy and started to study it, discovering almost the systemic devaluation. There's a huge outcry happening in the United States. A lot of this stuff is rippling into Canada, with the truckers, the freedom truckers, or the convoy, or whatever they call that. That systemic stuff. I mean, in the United States, there's a great backlash on systemic race theory, right? And there's folks on the right arguing that they don't want this taught. They don't want kids exposed to the fact that there are roots of racism that are deeply embedded in our culture. Well, that this session today is not a discussion about that, but when you think about disability discrimination, it's huge. Its tentacles reach deeply into history, where people with disabilities have been, devalued in huge systemic ways. I mean, if you look at this slide, you'll see this is a historical overview of how people with disabilities have been treated, right? And all the way back to a moral devaluation, where literally there was a belief in the community that people with disabilities have their disability because God is punishing them for sins, or for something they did, or something their family did. And that moral devaluation, this cuts deep into the psyche of a culture, especially a culture that has, a lot of religious overtones, where a lot of interpretation of what's happened, takes on some kind of a religious, perspective. I know in my own work in Pittsburgh, I had families actually say to me that they really felt that their son or daughter's disability, especially when it was a traumatic disability, was because of their behavior, and that God didn't like their behavior, right? That traumatic brain injuries, or spinal cord injuries, or automobile accidents, that these were things that were dictated really by God, because God was mad at them, or because God didn't like what they were doing. I mean, this is deeply rooted and embedded. And on top of that, this economic devaluation, where people with disabilities are really perceived to not be that valuable, or really help an economy. There's not much they can do. How can they really contribute or participate? And to that extent, then they're seen as takers and not givers in a culture. and the notion that there's not much they offer. And that's deeply systemic. And obviously institutionalization, that, institutions were first, initiated back in the 1300s when society really began to say, gee, we shouldn't necessarily kill them, but let's put them away. These folks have not much to offer, right? So that element of deeply rooted devaluation has led way, I think, to the world we find ourselves in right now, right? And this also fuels purpose, because if you look at it and you look at it analytically, if you look at this cascade, this historical cascade, you begin to say, no human being should be cast aside, and there got to be a place for all of us, and that everyone has something to offer, right? And so for many of us, when we begin to subscribe to those kinds of values, the net result of all of this stuff has been social isolation and disconnection from community. And so as we awaken to this, a lot of, I think, the purpose of an organization like Community Living Algoma, certainly the purpose of the organization that I worked for close to 50 years, was to really get people engaged, connected, involved, building of relationships, right? So we know that we still find ourselves in a phase of social institutionalization where people people with disabilities are really kind of still put away. It's a softer version of putting someone away, but something like a group home still manifests as a place for them, right? I know when John and Tanya and I have talked a lot about how does community see us, see Community Living Algoma, and how does it see the work we do and the people that we work with. And we still know that a lot of the community perceives us as taking care of them, that they're Community Living Algoma people, and we take care of them. And that's what we do. Right? So all of the separateness that still exists in community and culture and society also fuels the purpose of inclusion, and it challenges us, right? Because we know what's missing from all of this separation is a whole variety of things: friends, opportunities, perceptions in a culture, places to go, things to do, people to be with. All of that is missing when people are separated out, right? And so our clarion call as an organization has really been to promote social justice, right? To promote change, to try to change the paradigm, to shift our cultural exclusion of people with disabilities to become cultural inclusion, right? I mean, that's what we're challenged to do. Right? Now, you guys have heard me present or talk a lot about how do we do this, right? How do we change an existing mindset, how do we change an existing reality where we still have exclusion, separation of folks with disabilities, right? And change theory simply gives us two tracks to that. Now, this is the stuff that we've been talking about since I first came to Community Living Algoma, to meet with John and Tanya and and Corey, your other colleagues, was to say, how can we change this up, right? Now, micro change is when we change things within the person, right? Let me show this to you. Micro change is when we look clinically or therapeutically at somebody we're serving and really begin to say, gee, if we could get them to do something different or maybe something better, that would really help them become included, right? And that's true. In some cases, that's definitely true. That if somebody can garner more skills, then they become more skillful in being included, right? However, there's only, the micro intervention only goes so far, right? I've often talked about my cousin Carrie and her speech impediment that was caused by her cleft palate. When she was born, she had an open palate in the upper part of her mouth that ultimately had to be surgically tied back together, which then has serious effect on her speech. She sounded very garbled when she talked. And there was a lot of effort, a lot of recommendations on part of the system to our family for Carrie to have speech therapy, that speech therapy would help her speak better and enunciate words better. And sometimes therapies do that. Sometimes therapies can really help somebody function better. And in that better functioning, they find more success, right? So there's this micro change of model or paradigm, has really been, that was the start of rehabilitation. I mean, even when you look historically at how people with disabilities have been treated, there's this intervention period where medically and therapeutically, pharmacologically, psychologically, there were interventions that were offered to help people become more functional, right? Now, this micro change agenda, again, as I said, only goes so far. With my cousin Carrie, for example, it really didn't make her speak much better as much as she practiced or tried. In fact, what I think it did was make her feel more like a failure and more frustrated that she couldn't achieve what, therapists wanted or hoped she would be able to achieve. Right? So micro change only goes so far. It sees the person that we're supporting from a very individual perspective. It looks at their problems, it analyzes actions that can be taken to address the problem, right? Again, if you can't change the person, is that all there is? And obviously, we know that there's another side to all of this, and that's changing the culture in the community. And so over the last 7-8 years that I've had the pleasure of talking and being with friends and colleagues from Community Living Algoma, we've talked a lot about macro change. How do we change the community to accept somebody just as they are, rather than to expect them to be fixed, right? And so macro change is really in a way looking at a different target. Right? Macro change really begins to say, what can we do in our community that will make our community more willing to accept someone who perhaps can't speak that well, or maybe can't perform something. And we know that macro change, and again, we've gone through these discussions with our staff at Community Living Algoma, that the problem is not the person with disability, but the problem are really assumptions and perceptions and attitudes that are held in the greater community about disability. The problem is somebody who says, that's a Community Living Algoma person over there. in whatever situation they encounter. That's they're a community living Algoma person, right? It's that perception that really then presents the challenge to us, right? And so, we've talked about, well, how do we begin to address that? How do we mitigate that? How do we get people to think differently, to assume differently? And we were making great progress on this, right? We were really looking at things happening, helping people get jobs and helping people, get into their own places and joining things and we were seeing laws being passed, and we were really helping people begin to build relationships. And we know that when people have relationships, attitudes change, perceptions will change. If somebody is known, if they're known as just another person in the community rather than a CLA person, right? So relationships change attitudes, and we're making progress on this. And I think, wasn't we weren't all the way where we needed to be, but we were beginning to promote this paradigm shift, this notion that people in the community, as they got to know people who were experiencing disabilities, whether they were people associated with community with Algoma or not, that began to change their attitudes. And all of that was, was great progress, I think. And then the bottom fell out, right? Just as we were really excited about where we were and, where we could go again or further. No one anticipated that we would experience a stoppage in community. And that's actually what happened with the pandemic. It shut us down, and we're still shut down, right? We're still in the throes of this 2 years later. As we meet today, 2 years after the fact that COVID was really racing through our cultures and having devastating effects, deaths and significant illnesses, and we still don't know the long haul effects of COVID. I mean, that still remains to be seen. But nonetheless, we have this stoppage where the bottom falls out, and we still have a responsibility, to the men and women and children with disabilities that we support. We have a fiduciary responsibility. We have a values responsibility to those men and women. And how can we address that, right? And so as we started, through this pandemic back in March of 2020, a lot of things turned virtual. Everything shut down. People were quarantined. People stayed at home. They stopped going places. Community groups ended. And everything started to shift to Zoom, which we're on right now, right? We're still in the middle, of this period, right? This challenge, this chokehold, if you will, on community change and community inclusion, and the masking and all of that stuff has such significant impact on us, having really both an inward and an outward consequence. And we know, I mean, studies have now been popping up showing the mental health effects, the depression, the malaise that has got over us. I mean, we're doing our best to try to keep people connected and involved using Zoom and FaceTime and Skype and, other kinds of methodologies, but it's really sapped us. And for many of us, it really, it's taken the energy out, of our efforts, right? So here we are now. It's February 15th, 2022. We're not sure exactly when this pandemic is going to recede. I mean, there's some encouraging signs with infection rates going down. There's been some encouraging interventions, testing and other kinds of things that have happened, vaccines, and all of that hopefully is preparing us to begin to move out of this pandemic. And I'm very encouraged and hopeful that that we will turn the corner here, because all the signs are there. And so here we are right now, gathered to talk about how can we get our passion back up, after 2 years of being beaten down and not being able, and being fearful and being, quarantined or staying at home when we would rather have been out with our friends and with people that we care about. How can we begin to address this? And so what I wanted to do next was in understanding that things are receding a bit. I wanted to have you. I mean, we could break into work groups. We don't, we aren't prepared to do that. We're going to use the chat room instead. And what I'd like you to do is what personally, just thinking about your role at Community Living Algoma, how do you think you can get your mojo back? What do you think would be helpful to you? And it could be something we could do collectively. It could be something we could do organizationally. It could be something people could consider doing individually. But I'd like you to just reflect on what you think we ought to do. And then in the chat room, I'd like you to write down 1 or 2 recommendations or strategies or actions that you think would help your energy to get back. And now some of you may be still energized, and that's okay. And I'm not making total assumption that everybody is burned out. But I know that we've been slowed up, and this pandemic has paid, there's a price that I think organizationally we paid, and individually, I think we've been tired of this. So what if you could just add 1 or 2 ideas or strategies or recommendations in the chat room? What I'd like to do is explore those with you. I'd like, we all have access to the chat room on our Zoom system. So what we can do right now is, get into the chat room and then see some of these ideas as they unfold. I have some ideas, by the way, and I'm going to get into those in a minute. But I know you have ideas too, and I know you might have some recommendations or some thoughts about this. This is not Al Condalucci is going to tell us what we could do to get our mojo back. I think, as you reflect on this, we were making great progress until this pandemic began to hit. How do we get back? What's your thoughts on that? And so if you can go into the chat room and just add some of your thinking on this, and we've got about 40 of us on this call. And, I'd like to just see what you think. And then as you read through the chat, input, it might spur you maybe to another idea. Put that in if that comes up. In groupthink, that's called piggybacking. When you hear somebody or you see what somebody has done, and then you add on to it. So I'm going to go into the chat room right now myself, and I want to just kind of look at how things are unfolding and seeing what people, are saying. Some people are sharing that, looking forward to getting back to more in-person stuff and enjoying, some of the conversations that have happened when we were together, or the food we've shared. That's a great thought. We need to nurture one another, and so that's great. Like to meet with coworkers once again after seeing people on a daily basis and not seeing people but only on a video has been depressing to me. Well, this is true. It's the reason for our dialogue today is that clearly it's taken some of the energy out of us. We could explore new personal hobbies, interests, and maintain our family and friends connections. I think that's a really good thought. Other people are starting to say, I'm trying to prepare myself for a long, persistent struggle to overcome the inertia, constant slow pressure to reconnect with gatekeepers and families, and to see opportunities for sentiments to improve. Here's an interesting focus groups in the community to help change attitudes as we develop relationships. That notion of hearing what other people have to say, and staying focused in on this notion of what do other people in the community feel.